This topic, the elephant in the room, is something I've been wanting to talk about for quite a while, but I have held back from it because I thought it might make people uncomfortable. And that's why I titled it The Elephant in the Room. So if you've ever heard that expression, an elephant in the room is some big, obvious, important issue that people avoid because it's uncomfortable to face it and it's uncomfortable to talk about it. So, the elephant that I am going to talk about today is death. And if you have been attending our services for a while, you probably are aware that when we pray for someone who has died or the family of someone who has died, we don't usually even say death. We say the person made their transition, or they passed away. And even though everybody dies, people don't seem to want to face it or talk about it. And, I've thought about why don't we say death or died? And I will say that last week, Reverend Lena gave a sermon and she talked about a young girl who she was close to who died. And I thought, wow, I don't think I've ever heard her say that. Because most people believe that when the uh, human being exits the physical body, that the soul doesn't die and the spirit doesn't die. The soul and the spirit live on. And so I think that's why we say transition or past. But the problem with these euphemisms, in my experience anyway, is that it makes it really difficult to face what happened. So when I was 15, my father died. He had had cancer actually for 8 years. And when he was first diagnosed, I think they gave him less than a year to live. And he let himself be a medical guinea pig, basically, and lived for 7 years longer. But the last 2 years of his life, he was definitely deteriorating from the medical treatments, the drugs they had him on. And my family never talked about the fact that he was dying. Even after he died, we didn't really talk about how we felt about it. And it was during the summer and between my 10th and 11th grade. And when I went back to school after the summer, kids say, "Oh, how was your summer?" I remember feeling kind of like in an altered state of consciousness because I said, "Oh, my summer was fine." And what I really wanted to say is my father died. And to have my friends, ask me how I was doing and give me comfort, but I didn't even know how to say that because we just never talked about it. And so to me, it felt like I was living in kind of a double existence. And I think some of the kids probably wondered why I was being so weird, or, maybe they just thought I was introverted or didn't like people because I just had so much emotion inside that I wasn't able to talk about. And um, I think that for whatever reason, when people even bring up the idea of death or that someone has died, some people are comforting, but some people kind of want to talk them out of it. So when my husband died, I was also young when that happened. I remember going to get my hair cut, and I was an adult by then, so I was a little more graceful about, saying my husband died when the hairdresser said, "Oh, how are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, you just have to keep yourself really busy. Keep yourself really busy so you don't have to think about it." And I mean, to me, at that time, I didn't want to avoid it or, get rid of it. I wanted to experience the loss and how I was feeling. So, by contrast, when my mother died, she died a lot younger than we expected. We thought she'd lived to be over 100. She had an aunt who lived to be 102, and she was active. She played tennis every day. She rode her bicycle. Cognitively, she was all there. She was the editor of the newsletter at her retirement community. Um, but she had a massive stroke. And at the age of 79, I think, And she had, maybe because of her experience with my father's death, she had talked about death, worked it out. She had paid for and planned for her cremation. She was very clear about the fact that she didn't want any kind of heroic life-saving mechanisms. So she had a DNR, which means do not resuscitate. She didn't own a lot of stuff. She was kind of minimalist, but the things that she did own, she had asked my sisters and me if there's anything that we wanted. And so she had a list of, a couple of pieces of jewelry, my father's scrapbooks. She had it all laid out. And so, although uh, it's always difficult when a parent dies, it was so much easier for my sisters and me because she had talked about her death and we had talked about her death. And so there was no fighting over her stuff. There was no, having to uh, drive ourselves kind of crazy trying to figure out should we, you know, try to put her on any kind of medical things to keep her alive. And her younger brother, who I hadn't seen since I was a kid, he flew into Florida where she was from Seattle. He was the one remaining sibling of, there were five of them. And he basically told my sisters and me that we were killing her because we were not going to put her on any kind of life support. And I know that that was his own fears of his own death and projecting on to us and onto her how he would feel. And because of the fact that my mother had talked about her death and what she wanted, it didn't pull us in different directions. And it helped me to have compassion for him. And it helped us to be at peace with all of the decisions that needed to be made. So the point of this is not to bring people down, it's to bring up the fact that in our human experience, we all are born and we all die. And I have kind of reflected on this because our world is so divided in so many ways. People are divided politically, they're divided racially, they're divided religiously. And among all of our differences, the fact that we're all born and we all die is a human experience that we all share. So it makes sense to me that this subject of death, instead of kind of shoving it in a closet and avoiding it, it would bring us closer together if we could talk about it. I don't know if you have been around people who are sick, who are afraid to talk about death, but recently I've heard of a couple of examples. I have a friend, I'll call her Mary, that's not her name, but uh, to protect the innocent, I will give her a pseudonym. So uh, she had a very good friend who died, and she planned a beautiful celebration memorial service. And then she has another friend who has just recently gone through, I think, maybe four different surgeries. And this other friend said to her, when I die, I would like you to plan a celebration of life like you did for our mutual friend who died. And so Mary said, oh, don't even talk to me about that. You're not going to die. And so he kind of backed off. And, but clearly, it's something that he's thinking about after having four surgeries. And it would be helpful to have a friend who would hear him and listen to him and be able to help him so that he doesn't have to be alone in thinking about these things. And that's why I think it's important for us to talk about it. I don't think any of us really likes to be lonely. I mean, being alone can be nice, especially if you're around people all the time. Sometimes it's peaceful to be alone, but being lonely is not fun. And if I'm dealing with my own thoughts and fears or desires about death, and I want to share it with my loved ones, I don't want to feel lonely by having them push me away and saying, I don't even want to talk about it. So I have a friend who used to be a student of mine, And when she was in her late 40s, she was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of breast cancer. So she lives in a different state. I had, she set up a private Facebook group to share her, what was going on with all of her friends. And she had a very supportive group of people around her, mostly women who like were with her through all of her treatments. And I finally got to talk to her on the phone and I said, "How are you doing? Really?" And she said, "You know what? Everybody tells me you've got this, you're going to fight this because you're going through the chemo and all of these drugs." And she said, "I don't know that I have this. I might die. This is one of the worst kinds of cancer there can be." And she burst into tears and she said, "You are the only person I can talk to about this. Nobody will even let me bring up the fact that I might die. And I might die, really." And so I listened to her for, I don't know, maybe an hour. And I felt such a sense of, um, I guess I would say peace, that I was able to be there for her, and that clearly that was what she needed to be comforted, was not to say, "You've got this, you're going to fight this." Because if you think about the alternative to that, if you're fighting and then you die, it means you lost the fight. And in some cases, the medical community looks at death as a failure rather than a natural part of our life. So I'm going to tell you one more story and then uh, tell you why I think it's important, even if you're not dying and even if you're not sick. I have a friend who's from a very big family, the oldest of 11, and one of the siblings had died when he was a teenager in a kind of freak accident, but all of the other siblings were still alive. And one of his sisters was diagnosed with a brain tumor. She had surgery, she went through radiation, and she started doing chemo and hated it because it made her feel so sick. So she decided she didn't want to do the chemo. She had a very strong faith in God, and she believed that if she were to die, that that was part of God's plan and that it wasn't a punishment. It was just her time. And so she decided in whatever time she had left, instead of feeling sick from going through chemotherapy, she wanted to sit on her porch and see the birds in her backyard. And so she was in Tennessee. My friend was in Missouri. He used all of his time off to drive down there and to be with her. And I don't remember if he was with her when she died, but he definitely was with her through this process. And all of the rest of her siblings were not accepting of her decision because she was pretty young also. They were mad at her. It's like, how can you do this? How can you leave your kids behind? How can you leave your husband behind? And they weren't really thinking about her and her having a graceful end to her life. They were thinking about themselves and their own fear that they were going to lose her, which is very much like my friend Mary that I talked about, who didn't want to even talk about the possibility that this other friend might die. So my friend who was visiting his sister, who is not metaphysical and used to, uh, I'm not really put down my interest in dreams, but he didn't really believe that dreams were anything. After his sister died, he had a dream that she came to him and she said in the dream, "I'm sorry that you took all of your time off to be with me." And in the dream, he said to her, "I'm really grateful that I had this time with you." And obviously, it was profound enough to him that he knew that that was not just his imagination, that that was actually his sister's spirit that came to him in the dream. And so it gave him an affirmation that there really is life after death. And he shared it with me because he knows of my interest in dreams. And I don't think he was able to really tell anyone else about it because he thought people would think he was kind of crazy if he believed this was an actual visitation in a dream. So the reason that I'm bringing this up is that I believe that all of us want connection. We want connection with people we love. We want connection with people we don't even know. And I think that even though we all die, not everybody has the same beliefs about what that means. So even talking with our friends and our loved ones, or maybe people we don't even know about, what do I think happens after death? Do I think I'm just going to cease to exist and there will be nothingness? Do I think there's an afterlife, kind of like in the movies where there's heavenly clouds and I'll be floating up there with the angels if I was good, or down in the fire if I was not good? Do I believe in reincarnation, meaning that after my soul exits this particular physical form, that I'll come back as another human being? Do I believe in transmigration, which means I might come back not in a human form, but as a butterfly or a dog or some other form? Do I not really know what I believe? I think that's true with a lot of people, is that they're not sure unless they've had a near-death experience. And I think that when we share this with other people, it brings us closer to our own sense of peace. You know, what's going to bring me peace when I end this life? And it brings us closer to each other. So just like my sisters and I became closer when my mother died because she was so clear about her wishes, we could communicate and create something together to honor her. You know, there was no fighting or no worrying about it. And I believe that it can be really helpful if we don't already have uh, something clear about what we want, to research different religious traditions, because most spiritual or religious traditions have rituals around death. Like the Hindus believe if you chant the name of God in your final moments, it's going to give you liberation. I know that there are last rites that Catholics have. Sometimes people want certain music, they want certain poems read to them. You know, it's even important to talk about, you know, do I want to be alone? Do I want people to be in the room? Do I want people to touch me? Would I rather just have my body be able to be apart from that? And so I think as we do that, it can help shape our life now. And that's why I'm bringing this up, because I think I will become closer with the people I can share these concerns with. And as I contemplate the end of my life, it can also help me to see, do I have regrets? You know, are there people I need to make amends with? Is there somebody I've thought about reaching out to who I haven't seen in a long time, to tell them how much I appreciate them? And instead of waiting and then having those regrets when it's too late to do something about it, we can do something about it now. You know, it might be desires, like I've always wanted to go to Hawaii. It looks like Gary's in Hawaii, but it's just his Zoom screen. You know, but maybe I want to go traveling. Maybe I want to learn how to dance. Maybe I want to play an instrument. Whatever it is that we want, we have time now if we will consider this. So, one thing you might consider is, if there are people that you wish you could reach out to, is go ahead and do it. Maybe make a phone call, write a letter, um, talk about what kind of advice you want to give. That's one thing I was thinking is, had we talked about the fact that my father was dying when I was 13, maybe he could have said, you know, I'm not going to be around when you're applying for colleges. So here's some pieces of advice I have for you. Because I really missed him when I was applying for college, and I wished he were there to ask for his advice. So think about how you might leave a legacy for the people who come after you. Think about how you might become closer with the people in your life by sharing your thoughts. Think about how maybe you can help yourself to consider, what do I really believe happens when I die? I would like you to share with me this affirmation, which is talking about hard things brings us closer together in peace and understanding. And I wish you peace.